I try to pick the cases that are unfathomable, unbelievable, shocking cases that you just can't make up yourself. I'm gonna dive into the Mary who is contrary, or maybe not.
Can you fucking imagine?
Never gonna love me like that again. I don't wanna get over it. I wanna rip the stars to shreds. I don't wanna feel better.
On October 12, 2000, Mary Morris went into her office at work to find that her desk was in a disarray. Items had been rearranged, pictures turned upside down. Her coworker, Dwayne Young, had a calendar on his desk with "death to her" written on it. She was allowed to go home for the day. The next morning, her employers called to tell her that it would be best if she stayed at home to diffuse a situation. The office had turned into a scene when Dwayne demanded to see Mary after he had gotten fired for harassing her. He had to get escorted off of the premises. Nurse practitioner and a director. She was in charge of several clinics. She was a good employee. She got along with all of her coworkers, and all of her coworkers liked her, with one exception, and that is Dwayne Young. Dwayne worked right along with Mary as a nurse, and as their time working together progressed, Dwayne became obsessed with Mary. At first, it started off with hanging around at work, engaging in conversation with her whenever he could, any chance that he got. But his behavior was inappropriate, borderline obsessive. Mary complained to their bosses a lot about his behavior. Mary's allegations were verified by other coworkers. On top of Mary going into her office with it being disheveled, were the reason behind why he got fired. But he was thinking it was Mary's fault he got fired, that somehow it was conspired. So he was offended, causing a huge scene. He had no idea that she wasn't even at work. But for Mary, this did it for her. This was the last straw. She told her husband, Mike Morris, of 17 years, that she was afraid of Dwayne, that she wanted to get a gun for protection. Mary wasn't a gun enthusiast at all. She needed to learn how to use a gun. He summoned for Mike to put the gun underneath the seat of her car. She was very concerned for her safety. It was just another Sunday for Mary. She met up with her friend Lori at the clinic to give her an allergy shot. She seemed fine then. She stated that she was going to stay at the clinic for a few hours, planned on making a couple stops after the clinic before heading home to make dinner. One of Mary's stops was to a drugstore. While she was there, she called Lori at 5:34 p.m. to tell her that there was a man in the store that made her feel uncomfortable and was giving her the creeps. And Lori asked her if she was okay. And she told Lori that she was going to go back to work to sign out of her computer and then just go straight home, forgetting about the errands and other stops that she had to make in between, because this guy was just freaking her out. The next call that Mary McGinnis made from her cell phone was 12 minutes after she hung up the phone with her friend Lori. And this was to 911. She was being attacked while on the phone with a 911 dispatch operator. There was another phone call being made to Mary McGinnis' cell phone, and this was 7:11 p.m. It was Mike. That phone call kept ringing and ringing. It went unanswered. He went back into the movie theaters to finish watching a movie with their 9-year-old daughter. When Mary didn't return home that night, Mike filed a missing person report. Mary McGinnis Morris's Dodge Intrepid was found on a remote road in a vacant parking lot right outside of Houston, Texas, with Mary inside. She was shot to death from a single gunshot wound to the head with her own gun. Someone had tried to make it look like it was a suicide. When you think of someone being shot in the head, the gun is at the scene, most people think suicide. But something was very different about this scene. Her clothing was torn. She had scratches and bruises on her wrist. These are indications of a struggle. She was beaten, gagged, and her car keys were left outside of the car. There was blood on the passenger side of the door, and the door was left open. Her wedding ring was the only thing of value that was missing. And after she was laid to rest, her family had to make the painstaking duty of retrieving some of her personal belongings from the coroner's office. And when they arrived to the coroner's office on October 16th, they told the Morris family that they still had Mary's body. But Mary's family was confused by this. Mary's body had just been laid to rest at the funeral.
The woman
the Morris family was looking at on the coroner's table was in fact Mary Morris's body. It's just not the Mary Morris that they knew was the one to have died. On October 12th, 2000, a 48-year-old Mary Lou Morris hopped into her Chevy Lumina car to drive to her job in Houston's Spring Valley, and she did the same routine every single morning. She worked at Chase Bank as a financial advisor. And at 10:20 a.m., the fire department received a phone call from somebody who wanted to report that they had seen smoke in Harrison County. The fire department attributed this to burning leaves and debris, so they declined to investigate. Her husband of 6 years, Jay Morris, typically spoke with his wife Mary several times throughout the day. He hadn't heard from her, and this made him very worried. By the afternoon, he became very worried. He called the sheriff department to file a missing person report, and while Jay was filing this police report, the police were called to a wooded area for a burning. It was there that they realized that it wasn't burning leaves or debris at all. When the fire was completely put out, they realized that it was a vehicle and that there had been a body inside, so badly charred that the only fragments that they could get for DNA evidence were tiny fragments of teeth. And Jay was also at the scene because he had received a phone call from a family member who told him that there was a car that had been burned down with someone inside near where they lived, and that he should go check it out just in case, because he hadn't seen Mary. So he and Mary's daughter were at the scene of the fire. They didn't think that it was her. They just was like, wow, that's very unfortunate, but they couldn't get close to the scene. Police didn't want anybody in their area while they investigated. Jay and her daughter looked at the scene like, that's really unfortunate, but I don't think it's our Mary. They drove home. And with the tooth fragments, they were able to determine that the woman that was burning inside of the car was that of Mary Lou Morris. The fire made it impossible to determine exactly how Mary died, but it was obvious that it was a homicide. Two women who lived in the same city and shared the same name, had the same body style, had the same height, same hairstyle, basically the same age. They had never met each other before, but they both suffered the same fate. They were murdered and left in their vehicles 3 days apart in Harrison County, Texas. And neither of them were robbed, and the case is still unsolved. So, what happened? Mary Lou Morris was described to be one of the nicest people that you would ever want to know. She had 0 enemies. Her marriage was going great, five years strong, almost 6 years strong. She had a successful job. She was respected by everyone who knew her. It has been long speculated that perhaps their names may have been what had sealed their fate. Some people believe that a hitman was hired, he did a sloppy job, killed a Mary Morris, just not the right one. But there is not one shred of evidence that proves this theory. Mary McGinnis Morris, she had a couple of targets on her back. Besides the issues that she had with her co-worker Dwayne Young, she was also having problems in her marriage. They had moved from West Virginia to Texas 2 years before her death, and this was due to her husband Mike accusing her of infidelity. He was also apparently accused of infidelity. This led to a lot of petty arguments between them. Money problems. Mike he didn't have any motivation to try to find a job. It wasn't a priority for him. Mary had to be the one to step and pay for a lot of the finances. That's speculation, theories. And also, Mike had claimed that he was at the movie theaters with their daughter on the day that Mary had been murdered, but he refused to take a polygraph test. Also, didn't allow for investigators to question his daughter about what had taken place that day. He refused to allow her to be interviewed by the police. And shortly after his wife's murder, he hired an attorney. That doesn't make you guilty. I just thought I would throw that in there. It's important to some people. The investigators discovered that Mike did in fact call Mary around the same time that she had been murdered. He claimed to have called her. She didn't answer, that it just kept ringing and ringing and ringing, but the phone records indicated that the call lasted for 4 minutes. Michael claims that the 4 minutes on the phone was a mistake from the phone company. Then he also claims that the phone was ringing for 4 minutes, but the records show that it was an actual active phone call for 4 minutes. It had completed. In order for there to be a completed phone call, the person would have to have been on the phone. So some people speculate that Mike was on the phone with the hitman. If you remember that Mary McGinnis's wedding ring was missing from the scene of the crime, well, the ring appeared again. Yes, it reappeared on their daughter, and it was noted by somebody at a barbecue that they were at. When he was questioned about that, Mike said he actually found the ring at home. He just forgot to mention it to law enforcement. The message is that people who are hired as hitmen, a custom thing that they do is take the wedding ring to verify that the job is done. By the theory that Mike may have hired a hitman is because the wedding ring was the only thing of value that was taken from the crime scene when Mary McGinnis Morris was murdered. And then for the ring to reappear months later on their daughter, and for Mike to say that he forgot to let them know, which is significant. So they say that he might have been the person to have hired the hitman. And another damning piece of information, which has been assumed as the nail in Mike Morrison's coffin. He was wondering why people would think that he would do that. And others are saying that he had about 700,000 reasons to want Mary dead, on top of allegations of infidelity, money issues, things of that nature. The life insurance policy that Mary Morris had, that Mike was entitled to and received, are other reasons among many that he would have wanted to hire a hitman. And also, a Houston newspaper received a phone call from an unidentified caller, of course, and it said, "We got the wrong Mary." They said, "We got the wrong Mary Morris." Mary Lou Morris's husband, Jay, received a $2,000 bill from Mary Lou's calling card 6 months after she died. So somebody was using her calling card worth of $2,000. The police tracked the calls to a 16-year-old who said that they found a purse that had been discarded in Galveston, Texas, which is about 2 hours away from Harris County. In a convenience store parking lot, she had found a purse that was just discarded. Inside of the purse was Mary Lou's calling card. She had taken the calling card, but she had given the purse to her neighbor. And her neighbor did confirm the story. The neighbor didn't confirm the story. So law enforcement got the purse from the neighbor and they gave it to Mary Lou Morris's family, Jay and her daughter. They said that that wasn't her purse, that she didn't own this purse. It was a lead that went nowhere, on top of having not one shred of evidence. So they're thinking, did the hired hitman put the calling card into a random purse to throw law enforcement? Legally, they had nothing. There's no proof. These two cases with the same name, the same age, practically the same body style, it was a coincidence. Them being in the same county, the murder happening 3 days apart from each other was just mere happenstance. This led me to the conclusion that maybe Mike could have committed. Did Mike commit the perfect crime? And who was the one who was prank calling Jay, Mary Lou Morris's husband, after she died? The person was asking to speak to Jay and Mary Lou, but she had already died. Jay gave the caller the police department's phone number. And then the caller said, yeah, right. Jay never heard from the caller again. So who was the person who called Jay? All in all, so unsolved crimes drive me insane. But unsolved crimes that is so clear and obvious who the person might have, who it could have been, there's nothing you could do about it. Those are the kind of cases that are like, it's cringy. It's cringing. Kind of like my prior videos. I'm just kidding. It can be a little frustrating. Thank you for watching. Maybe we can find some more clues to show who did this. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
I listen to a lot of true crime. I listen to it